All right, in this video, we're going to go over the Unit 2A Quiz 2. That was the thing that you guys took on Friday. So let's go and get started. All right, so question number one is given, use the given point on the terminal side. So what we're going to do is, if you remember, we have a triangle that we have to create. So there's going to be our quadrants here. This is the information we need. We need -6, -17, which I'm just going to guesstimate and say is right there. Now remember, when you draw your triangle, you're going to draw it a diagonal going back to the origin, and then a straight line going back to the x-axis. So now also remember that these coordinates also double as the dimension. So this is going to be -6, this is going to be -17. So you got to find C, you got to find our hypotenuse. All right, so remember we're going to basically say -6 squared plus -7 squared is equal to C squared. So when you do the math, it's going to be it's going to be 325. So 325 is equal to C squared, which then we would square root it. Now, 325 is not a perfect square, so that means we're going to have to break it down. So two numbers that multiply to get 325, we're just going to say 5 and, let's see, 5 and 65. All right, so 5 and 65, and then that's 5 and 13. So if you notice, we were able to make a pair of 5s, and we have a 13 that's left over. So if I was to write a list, so 5 times 5 times 13. If you remember, if you're making a pair of anything, it goes on the outside. So a 5 will be on the outside, and a 13 will be on or inside the radical. All right. So I'm going to have to erase some of this. So feel free to go back and watch it again if you need me to, or if you need to, not me to. All right, so 5 radical 13. All right, so now we're looking for cosine. So cosine is, if you remember, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So the adjacent is -6. The hypotenuse is this ugly 5 radical 13. So we're going to do -6 over 5 radical 13. Now here's the problem. You have a radical in the denominator, which we have to get rid of. So we're going to multiply the top and bottom by radical 13, so we get -6 radical 13. Now, this is where some of you guys messed up. This 13 and 13 becomes a whole 13. However, this 5 is still down there, so it's 5 times 13. So my final answer is -6 radical 13 over 65. There we go. All right, question number 2, convert the following angles to radians, vice versa. So 553 degrees over 1, we're going to multiply that by pi over 180, okay? And we're going to get 535 pi over 180. Now, this is where some of you guys are still messing up when it comes to the calculator. Remember, you cannot, I'm just going to write over here in this 4 blank here, you cannot say 535 pi divided by 180 and then use the calculator to get a fraction. All right, it's not going to happen. Okay, so what you've got to remember is take the 535, do not put the pi symbol in there, but so you just do 535 divided by 180, and you're going to get 107 over 36. Now, you left the pi out, you got to bring it back. So it's going to be 107 pi over 36. All right. Now, when you're going from radians to degrees, you're going to multiply it by the reverse of what you did for degrees or radians. So it's going to be 13 pi over 5 times, put an x there, times pi over, or at 180 over pi. So we're going to get rid of these pi's because they're going to cancel out. So 13 times 180. So basically it turns into 13 dot, as in times, 180, whatever that is, divide by 5, and your answer is 468 degrees. All right, question number 5. All right, so sine, we know that sine is our y-coordinate, all right? And it says right here that it is a negative number, okay? We don't know what it is, but we know it's negative. Secant is also cosine, which is also x. X, if you notice again, is negative, all right? So we're dealing with a negative x and a negative y. The only quadrant to do that is quadrant 3. Now, cotangent is x over y, okay? And it says here that it is negative, okay? Now, it also says cosine is positive, all right? So that's a positive x that we're dealing with. However, our y will have to be negative because a positive divided by a negative will give me a negative. So that will be quadrant 4. All right. Determine the following. Sine 1050. Well, first thing out of the gate is I need to start subtracting 360s until I get something that's within the 0 to 360. It ends up being 330 degrees. All right. So if you go on the unit circle, remember sine is the y coordinate, and it is going to be -1/2. All right. So this is the eyeball test. Nothing calculating here. Cosine, remember, is the x. So if I look on my unit circle, radical 3 over 2. Now remember, tan is y divided by x. So we've done this long enough. I'm going to, actually, I said done long enough. I'm about to do it wrong. All right, so we did this long enough, so we know that it's going to be y 1 over, or -1/2. I'm going to go ahead and do a keep change flip, 2 over radical 3. All right, I'm going to do this the long way. It'd be -2 over 2 radical 3. Now, these negatives, these 2's will cancel out, so where it's -1 over radical 3. Now we have a radical in the denominator, so when we multiply the radical on the top and bottom, it turns into negative radical 3 over whole 3. All right. So question number 4, this is where we're dealing with reference angles. Remember, reference angle is the distance from the angle that you're working with, or the reference angle from 180 and all that. So this is 180. So remember, the reference angle represents the distance above and below 180, where that mystery angle would be. And then remember, this is 0 degrees going in this direction. Going in this direction is 360. Again, it is 41 degrees up and down. So it'll be 41 degrees in quadrant 1, because 0 plus 41 is 41. 139. Most of you guys got this, so I'm kind of speeding up a little bit just so you're not watching a 30-minute video. So there we go. All right, a circle has an arc length. All right, so if you remember, the relationship is the radius times the radian, and that will give me the arc length. Okay, now in this question here, we already know what the arc length is. It's 351.6, and the central angle is 21.9. So very simply, I'm just going to divide the two, which gives me 1605. Yep. Number 8 says a circle has a radius. So now we have a radius, and now we have the radian. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply. So 19 over 1 times 7 pi over 9. So when you do the math, let's see, 19 times 7, I believe that's going to be 133 pi over 9, and that will not reduce. That would not reduce whatsoever. All right, secant. So again, secant 330. Remember, secant is cosine flipped. All right, so if cosine is radical 3 over 2, we're just going to flip it. We're going to go 2 over radical 3. Uh-oh, we have a radical in the denominator, so we have to multiply the top and bottom by the same radical. So my final answer in blue, 2 radical 3 over whole 3. Now, cosecant is sine flipped. All right, so if sine is -1/2, just flip it, and we get -2. There we go. And remember, cotangent is x over y. So my x is radical 3 over 2. And again, keep change flip times 2 over, or -2 over 1. So when you do the math, I'll do it the old-fashioned way, long way, and just not cancel until the very end. So -2 radical 3 over 2. These 2's will cancel. I'm left with negative radical 3. There we go. All right, on the back here. All right, so the name of the game is factoring for this next step. But before we do that, let's go ahead and do the horizontal asymptote. So the largest exponent in the denominator is 3. The largest exponent is at unseen 1. So we have a denominator that's bigger than the numerator from an exponent perspective. So that means it defaults to y is equal to 0. Now for the wholes and vertical asymptote, we are going to factor it out. Factor out of 9, we're left with x plus 5. Now, this denominator, if you notice, has x to the third power. So we have to factor out an x first, and then we're going to break it up. X plus 5, x plus 8. All right, now if you remember, the wholes is anything that's the same. So x minus, or x plus 5, which means the whole will be at x minus 5. It's always opposite. But if you notice, I still got an x here, and I still got an x in that uh, parenthesis. So that means I'm actually going to have two vertical asymptotes. Well, the easiest one is the x plus 8, because we know that's um, x equal -8. However, if you remember in class, if you ever have an x that is outside of the parentheses, that means it's going to be 0. All right? Identify any slant asymptote. So first thing, I'm noticing, hey, that denominator is not in the form we need it, so I'm going to have to factor out a 3. So, and then I have x minus 5, so I'm going to put a positive 5 on the outside. 8, 20, -15. Drop your 8. Don't do anything to it. Just drop it. So 5 times 8 gives me 40. That gives me 60. And remember, this last column you can disregard. Now, if you remember, since I factored out a 3, I have to divide by 3. So y is equal to 8 over 3x plus 20, because 60 divided by 3 is 20. All right, solve the radical equation. So first off, I have 5n squared, n squared, and n. My common denominator would be 5n squared. So 5n squared, 5n squared, 5n squared. All right, so all the denominators cancel out. I'm left with n plus 1. The n squared cancels out, so I'm left with 5, because it's 5 times 1 is equal to, now notice, this n cancels out only one of these n's, so it's just 5n. So it's 5n and 5 equals 25n. All right? So from here, we're just going to do basic algebra here. I'm going to subtract n, and I'm also going to go ahead and add 1 plus 5. So that's 6 is equal to 24n, divide by 24, and then when I reduce, my final answer is going to be 1/4. So 1/4. Question 14, find the partial fraction. Remember, first thing we got to do is we have to x minus 4, x minus 1, the denominator. All right. Now, a lot of you guys are messing this up because you are kind of skipping a step. I recommend, guys, going ahead and do your AB step. So A, and I'm just going to put it over x minus 4 plus B over x minus 1. The reason I'm telling you guys to do this is so you know where does A and B go. Some of you guys are getting the denominators mixed up. This very, very simple step will help you stay on track. All right, so most of you guys know we have to multiply this entire thing by x minus 4 and then x minus 1. So when I do all that, it turns into 4x plus 5 is equal to a parenthesis x minus 1. See how, let me pause for a second. See how x minus 1 is different than a over x minus 4? A lot of you guys are just saying, hey, a is over x minus 4, so my next step would be a is now being multiplied by x minus 4. Please don't do that. A lot of you guys messed up on that. All right? And then we're going to go plus b x minus 4. Okay? Now at this point, remember we got to solve for a first, so we're going to make this x a 4. Remember, all the x's become a 4. So that will become 16. This will become 21 is equal to a, well, 3a actually, because b cancels out. So a ends up being positive 7. Now notice for my answer, I'm going to put a 7 here just so I know where that answer should go. All right? So let me kind of clean this up if I can. So now it's time to solve for b. So when I solve for b, now I got to find a number that will cancel out a. 1 will cancel out a, so everything becomes 1. All right, so let me keep cleaning this up a little bit. Again, back up the video if you need me to, or if you need to. All right, so 9 is equal to, that a cancels out, and that turns into -3b. So b ends up being -3. So that will become -3. So my final answer is 7 over x minus 4 minus 3 over x minus 1. All right? Or you could write it as -3 over x minus 1 plus 7 over x minus 4. Notice I just moved the fractions, but I did not move the numerators. All right. Solve just like we did on 13. All right, so my common denominator will be 4m squared, and then 4m squared. All right, so The m squares cancel out the m squares. However, it's going to be 2 parentheses 6m minus 5 that's left is equal to, let's see, the m squares get canceled out, and then that's 4 divided by 2, 2 parentheses m minus 5, plus all this cancels out, so I'm left with 4m plus 5. All right, so that turns into 12m minus 10 is equal to 2m minus 10 plus 4m plus 15. All right, so let's go ahead and do some solving here. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and, wait a minute, I put 4m. I'm sure you guys are yelling at the screen right now. Sorry, that should have been 5. Sorry, that should have been 5. Sorry. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and combine like terms here. I'm going to go ahead and add 10 on this side, and that just happens to cancel everything out. And I'm going to go ahead and take 2m and 5m and combine them. So I'm at 12m is equal to 7m plus 15. I'm going to subtract 7m, put everything on the left-hand side. I'm left 5m is equal to 15. And then when I divide by 5, m is going to equal 3. So my answer is 3. All right, so my last triangle question. So I'm going to draw it here. I already know it's in quadrant 2 because it says it, so I'm just going to go ahead and pre-draw my triangle here. All right, there's my right triangle. Remember, with cotangent, it's x over y, so that means it's going to be a negative 12, and cotangent is y, which is going to be positive 35. All right, so we are going to do the Pythagorean theorem. You should know this automatically at this point, equals c squared. And we're going to get a very big number, but c ends up being 37. So we know that c ends up being 37. And then cosine, remember, that's what we got to find. That is adjacent over hypotenuse. Remember, it's always from the perspective of the origin. So negative 12 is my adjacent over the hypotenuse, which is 37. There you go. All right, that's everything. Hopefully you learned something. As always, let me know if you have any questions. Have a good day.